I'll explain that evolution occurs when the gene pool of a population changes, not at the individual level. Gene pool is kind of like a swimming pool, and you dump all the genes in there that are available. For example, in this class, our gene pool consists of Philippa Berry students. They consist of mostly 9th and 10th graders. They consist of different height people. That's our gene pools. If we change the gene pool, then evolution will start to occur. We take out the 9th graders, we only going to have the 10th graders in this class. So evolution occurs not at an individual level, so you cannot evolve by yourself, but your species will evolve as a whole. I'll explain that geographic isolation may lead to reproductive isolation, which may result in speciation. Geographic isolation means that in the environment that you're in, you don't have the best adaptation, so instead of dying, you move. That's geographic isolation. When you isolate yourself from your species, you create reproductive isolation, meaning you don't have the opportunity to reproduce with your main species. In that case, over time, you're going to create speciation, meaning you created your own species because you're unable to reproduce with the original species. I will describe the evolution of pesticide resistance and antibiotic resistance. What this means is we know that bugs and bacteria have a mutation. These mutations may make them resistant or unaffected by any bug spray. Over time, that adaptation or that mutation will be passed on to the kids, and none of the offspring will be affected by that bug spray. All right, part 2 is classification, and we started classification on page 165. We just wanted to figure out, now that we know we have a lot of organisms, how they separated. We have domain, which we don't talk about a lot. Domain can be found on page 168. A domain is just how we separate the organisms. There are only 2 domains. Whether you have a nucleus, you're in the eukaryote domain. If you don't have a nucleus, you're in the bacteria domain. After that, we separate individuals by kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. The most important part is that you know the differences between the 6 kingdoms, and also that you know that genus and species is used for a scientific name, and species is the most specific group of all. And all of this can be found on page 166. On page 169, we talked about binomial nomenclature, how we can name organisms all across the world with 2 names, the genus and the species. The genus is always capitalized, the species is lowercase. To finish this up, on page 173, we threw in a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is you have 2 steps. You read the statement and it takes you to a step. You read the statement and it takes you to a step. You continue doing this until you have figured out which organism you're dealing with. Phylogenetic tree on page 171. It is similar to an upside down family tree where basically we want to find out who's the common ancestor or who is most closely related. The common ancestor is the one that's all the way at the bottom of the tree on page 171, and closely related are 2 who are the closest on the branch. Cladograms. Cladograms are also on page 172. Cladograms are a tree separated by characteristics. You have 2 animals, and in between those 2 animals, you see a characteristic that will separate them. This goes with shared traits or characteristic that's going to separate them. We have a few things that we need to know in this part, and we will be finished. I will explain the historical development of the classification system that moved from a two-part to a 5 or 6-part system. We did this on page 167 and also 165. We started with thinking that there are only two ways to classify organisms, plants and animals, and now we know that there are 5 or 6 kingdoms depending on if you combine bacteria. We have plant animal, Monera, or Eubacteria and Archaeobacteria. We have fungi and we have Protista. Number 2, I will identify the 6 kingdoms of living organisms and provide examples of each on page 167. You should be able to identify the only kingdom with prokaryotic cells. You should be able to identify that there are 2 kingdoms that are strictly multicellular. Bacteria, if you break that down, is unicellular for both kingdoms, and fungi and protists have both multi and unicellular organisms. You should be able to know that cell walls are only present in organisms that have no bones, like the plants, so the bacteria, the fungi, and the protists. You are autotroph if you have a chloroplast. You're usually green in color, and animals are the only kingdom with sexual reproduction. I will describe the 7 levels of the classification system from general to most specific, and we did this on page 166. We know we have King Philip came over for green spinach, or kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You never have to know what these words mean. Just know the order. Know which one is the most general or includes a lot of animals. Which one is more specific. I will compare the 7 levels in order to identify or determine which ones are most closely related. On page 169, by looking at the names, we were able to figure out which 2 species was most closely related. I will recognize an organism's scientific name and identify the genus and species. We know that organisms are named by their genus and species. Genus comes first and is capitalized. Species comes second and is lowercase. I will use the dichotomous key to identify individuals. We did that on page 173, 174, 175. There are 2 statements. You read those statements and tell you which steps to go to. I will interpret a phylogenetic tree. A phylogenetic tree is like a family tree. The common ancestors at the bottom, closely related, is 2 branches closest together. Cladogram. A cladogram is a tree separated by characteristics. We did this just to try to figure out evolutionary relationships, who's most closely related. All right, Unit 7 test is tomorrow. See ya.